There are three 1/4 inch thick layers to this project. I will cut the top layer from red oak and the middle and bottom layers from sapele. I've used this combination of wood before, and the colors and grains contrast nicely. For 1/4 inch material, my rule of thumb suggests a number 3 blade, and I'm using a number 3 Pegasus modified geometry blade. If you're new to scroll sawing, I suggest you watch my blade test videos to see why I chose the Pegasus modified geometry blades as my go-to series. You should also watch my video on choosing the correct blade size for the project. This would be a good beginner project as there are only 2 inside cuts on the top layer, 1 on the middle, and none on the bottom. There are only a few sharp turns, and I'll give tips on how to make them when we get to those parts of each piece. I started cutting at the top of the middle S in the name Jesus. This is a good place to start because the outside cut will end at the top with a line that comes in at 90 degrees to the first cut. I like starting and ending at places like this rather than on a curve because you can end up with a small rough spot if the blade isn't perfectly aligned with the cut line at the start and end. You can always sand down the rough spot, but I'd rather avoid creating one in the first place. There are some sharp turns at the bottom and top of the letter E. This is the way I navigate them. Cut to the point where the vertical line comes to the serif at the bottom of the E. Back off pressure slightly so the blade is not cutting. Pivot the workpiece to the new direction you want to cut, then put pressure back on the blade to begin cutting again. You only have a short distance to travel before you need to make a 90-degree turn to the left. Back off pressure once again, swivel the workpiece, then start cutting across the bottom of the E. That's the way to make 90-degree or other sharp corners. You'll need to do this on many scroll saw projects, so work on making it such an automatic process you won't even have to think about how to do it. Like so many activities, you'll get better at it with repetition. If you're new enough at this that the procedure seems impossible, there's another way to approach sharp angle cuts. You could cut to the bottom of the serif on the E, then back the blade up inside the curve you just created. Use the waist area to maneuver the blade to line up with the next part of the serif, then cut to the corner. Now you can back the blade out a short distance, align it with the line at the bottom of the E, pivot the workpiece, and start it cutting again. Basically, anytime you need to cut a corner, you can use the waist area to maneuver the blade into position for the next cut. If you're more comfortable doing that, then pivoting the saw blade inside the curve. Usually I make interior cuts first, but somehow I didn't see those spots inside the E and the second S. This just means I'll have to be a little more careful cutting them now because the piece is a little smaller and more fragile. I drilled a couple of pilot holes with the drill press, then brought the workpiece back to the scroll saw to make these last 2 cuts. Both letters had 90-degree corners to cut. The procedure is just like outside cuts, so you can choose between the 2 choices for making this type of cut that I've already described. I removed the scroll saw tape I used to attach the pattern to the wood, so you can see the top layer with the name Jesus cut vertically from red oak. There are 3 interior cuts in the middle layer, and this time I not only noticed them, but also drilled the pilot holes and made the interior cuts first, as I usually do. The outside was a normal combination of straight lines, angles, and curves. In short, this is an excellent beginner's pattern, but it's interesting and complex enough for an intermediate to advanced scroll saw user. There was one tip worth noting on the outside cut for the middle layer. I laid this out on a piece of sapele that wasn't much longer than the wood was tall. I always try to do my layouts with as little waste as possible, and you should as well. I started cutting at the top of the cross and followed the cut lines down to the bottom. I could have continued around the bottom and up the other side to the top, but when I got to the bottom, I continued cutting until I ran off the edge of the piece. I did this so I didn't have a large waste piece hanging by a tiny bit of material. Sometimes a piece like that can drape over the edge of the scroll saw table. It can catch so that you can't continue to cut, or, worst case scenario, it can cause the workpiece to break, potentially ruining hours of work. The pieces are all cut, and I used a quarter sheet of 150 grit sandpaper to soften the edges a bit. As I was thinking about the glue up, I decided to do it in 2 stages. My reasoning was that if I glued all 3 layers at once, there might be some shifting of the pieces and the final assembly would be off. The reason is that when you first apply glue, it's very slippery. I found it is best to add glue and then let the pieces sit for a short time while the glue sets up a little. Once that starts to take place, it's easier to add clamps without the pieces moving as you tighten the clamps. I made sure the entire back of the middle layer was covered by spreading the glue with my finger. I particularly wanted to make sure there was glue all the way to the edges so the pieces didn't separate. The stock is 1/4 inch thick, and 1/4 inch stock has a tendency to warp due to the moisture of the glue. At the same time, I don't want a lot of squeeze out. I plan on using a spray polyurethane to finish this, and the finish doesn't adhere to dry glue. So any squeeze out needs to be removed with a damp cloth while it is still wet or sanded off once it is dry. Then I had inspiration concerning clamping. F-clamps tend to make pieces move because of the circular motion of the clamp. But right at the end of the workbench is a wood vise. That vise applies pressure evenly from front to back. I flipped the cross so the widest part was facing down and closed the vise over that. Then I added some F-clamps because with the vise holding the center part of the cross, I knew these clamps couldn't create any unwanted movement. The first stage of the glue-up worked perfectly, so now it's time to add the top layer. You need a glue bottle with a small tip, which I have. Once the glue is applied, I use my finger to spread it around. I carefully placed the name of Jesus on top of the cross because I didn't want any glue in areas that wasn't needed. I used the same clamping technique as before. I let this dry overnight, and tomorrow I'll apply a couple coats of spray polyurethane. These are the front and back views of the cross. I completed it with several coats of warm satin spray polyurethane. This sapele has a fantastic grain pattern. It's too bad it won't be showing. As I mentioned at the beginning, there was nothing difficult about this project, so it would be a good one for a beginner. Please give me a thumbs up if you liked the video, and as always, I will respond to any comments. There should be suggestions for the next video to watch on the screen now. I look forward to seeing you there.